On the night of March 9, 1945, more than 330 B-29 superfortresses took off from the islands of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. Their target was Tokyo, a city of roughly 7 million people, built almost entirely of wood and paper. The operation had a code name, Meeting House, but no euphemism could disguise what was about to happen. By sunrise, 16 square miles of the capital would be gone and an estimated 100,000 people dead. This was not an atomic attack, not yet. It was fire. Napalm, magnesium, and phosphorus, thousands of M69 incendiary clusters designed to burst open midair, scatter burning gel, and turn entire neighborhoods into furnaces. In a single night, the United States Air Forces killed more civilians than in any other bombing in human history. The raid didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the outcome of months of frustration and one of the most brutal command decisions of the war, one that divided America's own bomber generals. By late 1944, the U.S. Army Air Forces had reached Japan, but their precision bombing strategy wasn't working. The B-29s flew from high altitude in daylight using the same tactics that had flattened German factories. Over Japan, they missed almost everything. The jet stream over the Pacific blew bombs off target. Cloud cover hid the islands most days of the year. The crews flew 12-hour missions and came back with photographs showing entire loads dropped into the ocean. The man in charge, General Haywood S. Hansel, believed in precision, hit aircraft plants, power stations, docks, not civilians. He'd spent years refining that doctrine in Europe. But by the end of 1944, results were so poor that Washington lost patience. In January 1945, Hansel was removed. His replacement, General Curtis LeMay, was the youngest general in the U.S. Army Air Forces and the opposite type of commander. LeMay had learned over Germany that firebombs worked when nothing else did. He stripped the B-29s of most guns and armor, ordered them to fly low at night, and carry nothing but incendiaries. Tokyo was chosen first because its eastern districts, Shitamachi, a dense working-class sprawl of wooden row houses and small factories, were the heart of Japan's cottage war industry. Officially, that made them a military target. In reality, it meant hundreds of thousands of civilians were inside the target zone. When LeMay issued his new orders, no one refused. Some airmen later said the change felt ruthless, but they obeyed. The next mission was no longer about accuracy, it was about burning a city. Before the bombs fell on Tokyo, an entire chain of islands had been turned into launch pads for the B-29s. In the summer of 1944, U.S. Marines captured Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in the Mariana Islands campaign, battles fought partly to give the U.S. a direct route to Japan's home islands. From these volcanic islands, Japan lay 1,500 miles away, within range of the new B-29 superfortress, the most advanced bomber of the war. Each B-29 was a 30-ton machine with pressurized cabins, remote-controlled guns, and a 3,000-mile range. To make this possible, entire bases were built from scratch, runways carved out of coral, fuel farms, and maintenance depots large enough to service fleets of hundreds. Thousands of ground crews lived in tents and Quonset huts, working around the clock to prepare the planes. Mechanics had to redesign engines in theater to handle tropical conditions. The scale of logistics was staggering. Each Tokyo raid required roughly 500,000 gallons of aviation fuel and thousands of tons of bombs ferried from across the Pacific. From late 1944 onward, the 21st Bomber Command on Guam directed the operations. The strategy was clear: cripple Japan's ability to fight by destroying its industrial and urban base. The only question left was how. LeMay's answer was to drop the altitude, change the targets, and trade precision for results. LeMay's staff turned the next mission into an engineering exercise in how to burn a city. Tokyo was mostly wood, bamboo, and paper packed into neighborhoods where homes touched at the eaves. Precision bombing of steel targets had failed. Fire could do what explosives couldn't. The M69 incendiary bomb became the key weapon. Each weighed about 6 pounds, filled with a napalm-like jellied gasoline. Clustered in groups of 38 in an M19 canister, they burst open hundreds of feet above ground, spreading flaming gel that clung to everything it touched. Once one roof ignited, entire blocks followed. To maximize coverage, LeMay ordered radical changes. The B-29s would fly at 5,000 to 7,000 feet, not 30,000. They would attack at night to avoid flak and fighters. Defensive gun turrets were removed to carry extra fuel and incendiaries. The first Pathfinder aircraft used radar to mark the drop zones over Shiramachi, Tokyo's working-class district, dense with homes and small factories producing military parts. Inside the bomb bays, crews packed nearly 1,700 tons of incendiaries. For the airmen, it was a calculated mission, the fastest way to end the war by fire. What awaited them and Tokyo would turn that calculation into the most lethal air raid ever conducted. At 5:35 p.m. Guam time on March 9, 1945, the first B-29s lifted off. They would reach Tokyo just before midnight local time. The attack plan was methodical. The lead Pathfinder crews from the 314th Bombardment Wing used radar to find the target and dropped marker flares over the eastern district of Shiramachi. LeMay's order was simple: build a fire pattern that would merge into a single inferno. The first waves flew in at roughly 5,000 feet, low enough to feel the turbulence of their own bomb blasts. They dropped clusters of M69s in long, overlapping lines. The wind off Tokyo Bay carried the flames through narrow streets packed with small houses and workshops. As later waves arrived, the sky below them glowed orange. Crewmen said the fires were so intense they could navigate by light alone. The heat created updrafts strong enough to toss the bombers upward and columns of smoke 20,000 feet high. Within 2 hours, the entire eastern half of the city was on fire. Streets melted, canals boiled. The air raid sirens had failed long before the main force arrived. From the air, the target was no longer visible, only a mass of flame. The crews kept dropping their loads, following the pattern until the bomb bays were empty and the fuel gauges forced them home. By dawn, 279 B-29s had returned. 14 were lost. The mission was labeled an operational success. On the ground, it was unlike anything Japan had faced. The Shiramachi district, a web of wooden homes and family workshops, ignited block by block. Each new gust turned single fires into walls of flame. As oxygen was consumed, the firestorm began drawing air inward at hurricane speeds. People tried to flee toward the Sumida River or the canals, carrying children and small bundles of possessions. The water itself caught fire as flaming debris and oil drifted across the surface. Survivors later described people jumping in and never resurfacing, boiled or suffocated. Fire brigades were helpless. Their hoses burned through. The heat cracked pavement. One civil defense worker recalled that when he tried to dig a firebreak trench, his shovel sank into molten asphalt. By morning, roughly 100,000 people were dead, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey's conservative count, and nearly 1 million homeless. 15 square miles of Tokyo had ceased to exist. Survivors described walking under a red sky and stepping over bodies reduced to ash. One woman later said, "We didn't scream. We couldn't. We just walked because there was nowhere left to run." The imperial government released no casualty figures that week. For the crews flying back to the Marianas, there were no photographs yet, only reports that Tokyo had burned exactly as planned. From the American command's point of view, Operation Meeting House was a technical triumph. Reconnaissance photos taken days later showed that Tokyo's industrial heart, the small family workshops that built aircraft parts, ammunition boxes, and electrical fittings, had vanished. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey later calculated that more than 250,000 buildings had been destroyed and that nearly 1/4 of Tokyo's manufacturing space was gone. Factories that survived couldn't function, workers were dead or displaced, roads were impassable, and electric power failed across the city. Japan's transport ministry admitted that even railway timetables collapsed because signal stations and dispatch offices had burned. For the U.S., it proved that firebombing worked where precision hadn't. LeMay's command made the tactic standard. Within weeks, more raids hit Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, each producing similar destruction. Tokyo would be struck again in May with another massive incendiary attack. But for Japan's war planners, the March raid marked a turning point. The home front was no longer safe, and no air defense could stop what was coming next. When daylight returned on March 10th, the eastern half of Tokyo was an open plain of ash. Police and army units sent to assess damage found streets covered with carbonized bodies, some sitting upright on bicycles, others fused together in shelters. The Japanese Home Ministry estimated 1 million people homeless. Thousands fled to parks and railway tunnels. Government relief stations issued rice balls and miso soup, but water and sanitation were gone. Epidemics soon followed. Survivors remember the silence more than the flames. Entire neighborhoods had disappeared, leaving no one to even identify the dead. Official reports were suppressed to prevent panic. Newspapers described only damage to the eastern districts. Within a week, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police were already collecting ashes and bones into urns, interred in temporary mass graves. The government quietly ordered the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of children to rural areas, knowing more raids were inevitable. For the crews who had flown the mission, news came through reconnaissance photos and short dispatches. Tokyo had been neutralized. For those who lived there, the word meant something entirely different. The success of the Tokyo raid changed the entire American air strategy overnight. Within days, General LeMay ordered the same low-altitude incendiary attacks against other industrial cities: Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and dozens more. Between March and August 1945, 66 Japanese cities were systematically burned. Each raid followed the same formula: napalm clusters, low flight paths, and dense residential targets. By summer, Japan's major urban centers were rubble. At Kobe, 1/5 of the population was killed or injured. In Nagoya, the wooden homes around aircraft plants vanished in a single night. The raids on Osaka destroyed its rail lines and port areas, crippling transport across the main island of Honshu. Tokyo itself was hit again multiple times. By July, the city had been attacked so often that American intelligence described it as essentially gutted. Altogether, the firebombing campaign killed at least 300,000 civilians across Japan before the atomic bombs were dropped. In Washington and Guam, the numbers were treated as evidence that LeMay's plan had worked. In Japan, it meant the war had reached the doorsteps of ordinary citizens. After Japan's surrender, the burned-out districts of Tokyo became refugee camps. Families rebuilt shacks from sheet metal and scrap lumber. Disease spread through the ruins. There was little food. Much of the relief came from the same American forces that had destroyed the city. Survivors began organizing quietly, collecting ashes from temporary graves and creating local memorials. The government, preoccupied with occupation reforms and rebuilding, rarely acknowledged their losses. In the United States, Curtis LeMay was promoted and later helped form the U.S. Air Force. Haywood Hansell, the general he replaced, retired early. his insistence on precision bombing relegated to footnotes. Decades later, Hansel would write that area bombing had been a technical success, but a moral defeat, a rare public reflection from a man who had watched his doctrine overtaken by fire. In Japan, survivor groups spent years fighting for official recognition and memorial sites. Only in recent decades has the firebombing entered public consciousness through oral histories and museum exhibits. Today, the Tokyo Firebombing Center in Sumida Ward stands near where the raid began. It holds photographs, survivor sketches, and personal relics, house keys, melted watches, bits of charred cookware. For most of the world, the night of March 9, 1945 is overshadowed by Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But for Tokyo, it was the night the sky itself became the weapon.